On this episode of the Curmudgeon Rock Report, we introduce a new recurring series we call In Defense Of. So, who are we defending the first time out of the gate? Stone Temple Pilots. You might be saying, seriously? Yes, seriously. Very, very seriously. STP is arguably the most disrespected band of its time and place in rock history. The usual rock snobs punished them for having the nerve to hit MTV a year after Pearl Jam did, arriving as it did with another charismatic, growling showman for a frontman, and more Kiss-inspired radio rock riffs. They also equated the tragically departed Scott Weiland's publicized drug addictions and related criminal entanglements with the persona of the band. That's just lazy, but that's basically what happened. Here's the thing though, STP got better as the 1990s progressed. They got a lot better, and then they got a lot better than even that. Yet their surprising sophistication, cleverness, and extensive rock and roll vocabulary, steeped in the 1970s, was mostly met with an undeserved shrug. So yes, we will be defending Stone Temple Pilots. We'll hit some myths head on. Were they a Pearl Jam ripoff? No way. And we'll explore the band's music, their albums, and their ultimate legacy with curmudgeonly depth. It's a big bang, baby. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the 24th edition of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. This is Christopher O'Connor coming to you from suburban Houston. And with me, as always, is Arturo Andrade coming to you from Gwangju, South Korea. And we host the podcast made just for you. We don't do hot takes here on the Curmudgeon Rock Report. We do honest takes. So then, this belongs to you. Well then, who are you? You are the rock geek iconoclastic outsider looking for safe haven in a world where rock and roll no longer predominates. Well, it sure as heck predominates here on the Curmudgeon Rock Report, where we not only celebrate the music, we live its majesty in full color and at full force. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some stuff you never knew before. Join our curmudgeonly community today. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, and all the other places where you find all the other podcasts. Drop us a line at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at curmudgeonpod. And coming soon, you'll be able to become part of our own private Facebook group where you can share the thoughts, musings, and random excitement with your fellow travelers among the curmudgeonly path to rock and roll goodness. Hey, Arturo, are you ready to boogie?
Yeah, I am. And more than that, it just dawned on me that this month, we're in December, as we're recording this. This month marks the six years after the death of Scott Weiland, the lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots, and we are doing an STP-centric episode today. So, yeah, it's fitting. Before we get to that, I cannot think of anything less Stone Temple Pilots-like than this today's episode of the edition of the Parallel Universe, otherwise known as the Country Music Edition of the Parallel Universe.
Wow, they have twang in the Parallel Universe?
Hey, dude, I'm going to bring the twang later.
Okay. Well, tell us more about what we're doing here in the Parallel Universe today, Arturo.
Well, my album is by a country star who would be a superstar if country music were better. And you're doing a duo album, and one of the members of that duo is legitimately country music.
But that was the worst Levon Helm impersonation I've ever heard in my life.
I got to try something.
Yeah, I was going to say, you got to swing for the fences once in a while.
But anyway, yes. So that sound you hear, ladies and gentlemen, is it coming? Yes, you hear it now. There it is. It is the country music edition of their curmudgeonly Parallel Universe. In this Parallel Universe version of Earth, country mainstream country music radio is not a piece of shit run by right-wing rednecks. It is actually run by real country music artists making real country music, not, as Tom Petty calls it, really bad pop rock with fiddles. So I will begin with my recommendation. And this is a real album by an artist that if you're not into country music, you would not know. But anyway, for those of you who don't know, Sturgill Simpson is a mid-tier country music star. And what he really is a throwback to 1970s anti-establishment outlaw country music. He solidified himself as this with his first two albums, 2013's High Top Mountain and 2014's Meta-Modern Sounds in Country Music. The latter is arguably the best country music album of the last decade. Now, this being the parallel universe version of Earth and country radio that Chris and I have created, contemporary country music would not be the tacky right-wing miasma oozing from country radio stations, but it would instead be real country music. And in this universe, Sturgill Simpson is much more than a mid-tier star. So, of course, Simpson being against everything that the Nashville establishment stands for, in the inferior regular universe, it is natural for him to want to show off his eclecticism. In his 2016 album, A Sailor's Guide to Earth, he expanded into R&B and soul, 60s, 70s style, of course, revved up country rock, and it was also notable for a charming old-school country cover of Nirvana's In Bloom.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah, no joke. No joke. He did that, and it's really good. He followed that up with 2019 Sound and Fury, which deeply divided his fans and pissed off his record label, Elektra, at the time. What was Simpson's attempt at glossy 1980s style pop rock ended up sounding something like Waylon Jennings trying to cover Loverboy. Needless to say, it sucked.
I think that's about the most dead-on description. It doesn't take much imagination to hear that one, or not want to hear that one.
Not want to hear it. Yeah, he loved it. No one else did. Anyway, in 2020, the pandemic, in addition to a COVID-19 infection that he got, saw good old Sturgill retreat to his home and the studio, and he released two albums of bluegrass versions of songs from his back catalog. Now, this really tipped his hat as to what he would do next. And what would come next is an album called The Ballad of Dude and Juanita, a genuine, honest-to-God, old-school, old-fashioned, twangy-ass country music record. Like the best country albums, it's a story album about a Kentucky farmer named Dude, whose half-Native American wife Juanita is kidnapped by some crooked varmint. Old Dude travels high and low until he finds Juanita, reclaims her, and kills the bastard who stole his wife. It's a classic, comforting, endearingly traditional country music tale of love and revenge. And it's short, too. And a little under 30 minutes in length.
Yeah, 27 and a half minutes. And
I know.
he loves Juanita so dearly so that he recruited Willie Nelson to help him co-write the song to Juanita.
Yeah,
that's exactly how true this record is.
Yeah, it's very old school. You have tear in your beer balladry, such as One in the Saddle and One on the Ground. You have Mexican mariachi-flavored love songs like Juanita. And you have upbeat country shuffles that go off into bluegrass jams like the song Shamrock. Now, here's the thing is, the irony of Sturgill Simpson is that as much as he aspires to be eclectic and diverse with his musical palette, his songs are actually at their best when they are within the confines of traditional country music. And I've always felt that. So, Sturgill, welcome back to the country fold. Think twice before you leave it again.
Yeah, seriously. I really do like this little record. Again, it's very focused. It's very reverent. Obviously, he's going for what was a pretty strong country music tradition there for a while in the 60s and the 70s. It seems like everybody and their brother was doing a version of this kind of thing. And again, it goes back to Appalachia, and it goes back to 150 years. There's an American song tradition of these folk ballad song suites.
Yeah.
But like, Kenny Rogers did a couple of, obviously The Gambler is one of those. And, they all did one. Merle, Weiland, Willie did a couple.
Johnny Cash in the 60s did a bunch of them.
Yeah, and then Chris Christopherson made a career out of that. Although his folks were more real and more raw and more gritty. But Sturgill is standing on the shoulders of giants here, and I wasn't kidding when I said that Willie Nelson helped out. He actually did co-write the song Juanita. So Sturgill's got friends in very high places. You believe the guy is 90 years old now?
Yeah. Good old Willie. He doesn't die easily.
No, I was going to say, God bless him. So, and like Arturo alluded to, we're really focused on country-ish or American vernacular music, to use a phrase that Peter Goralnik made popular for rock and roll nerds like us. So my album, it's way more mainstream, and it's getting a lot of press, and maybe not deservedly so, but understandably so.
Right.
We're talking about Robert Plant, who, for the second straight week, Robert Plant is on the cast, and Allison Krauss. Most of you will remember that they released an album in 2008 called Raising Sand, which won a whole bunch of Grammys and really got a lot of love, and was sort of the really cool album for middle-aged people and older people back then. And it really was kind of a lightning in the bottle effort, because you had, it was kind of a Frankenstein's monster of an Americana effort, because you had Robert Plant, who we all know from Led Zeppelin and from his other world music ventures of the last 20 years. Arturo talked about the Rearranger last week. And then you have Allison Krauss. And I got to hand it to Allison Krauss. It's felt like she's been bursting on the scene since she's been around. She's been around 25 years. So she's managed to keep herself kind of in a fresh position. And so you've got those two coming back together again to do Raising Sand, who were on Raising Sand. And then T-Bone Burnett was their producer. And so here was a very clever but very cool combination of these two great interpreters of Americana, whatever you want to call it, folk, blues, roots, country music, with a producer who had a very distinct Americana steeped style in Burnett. Echoey guitars, very just sort of very spooky, kind of purposely evocative, cinematic, and put those three together, and you end up with one of the best albums of 2008, Raising Sand.
2007, actually.
2007. Oh, okay. They won the Grammy in 2008.
Right.
Yes, but this album was 2007.
Yeah.
And so after many years of fits and stops, and say, hey, do you want to do a follow-up to that? Well, maybe we can. And there were some false starts. Well, here at the end of 2021, they finally were able to pull it together, and they have now come out with the follow-up called Raise the Roof. Get it? Let's talk about this for a little bit. Now, T-Bone Burnett, again, a champion producer of a lot of Americana artists over the last 20 years, fabulous guitar player, fabulous producer, but he has this, he has his magic kaleidoscopic Americana jukebox, where basically his thing is he wholeheartedly believes, and his output really strongly suggested that he can take any song and Americanize the shit out of it. I think that's what he's really going for. And so, when he does things, he creates these dreamscapes, and they really are informed by the ghosts of Appalachia and Bayou country. I'm down here in Bayou country now, here in Houston, and there is a Bayou sound. There's a Louisiana side to it and a Texas side to it, and T-Bone seems to capture both. Now, the dreamscapes on Raise the Roof, some of them are hopeful and wide-eyed, and others are darker and closer to nightmares. Now, there's a fine line between mystical and spooky, and Burnett, he usually toes that line without fear. Doesn't mean it always works, though.
Yeah.
On this record, I actually prefer the nightmares to the dreams. And the problem ultimately is that there's more dreams than nightmares. Album gets off to a really strange start. The first two dreams, or the first two songs out of the gate, they aren't only lovely, but they're also poppy. And not only that, they kind of do the reverse of what they were doing on Raising Sand. Whereas that record consistently put an edge on its selected songs. Here, with the first two volleys out of the gate, which are reworkings of Calexico's Quattro, World Drifts In, and the Everly Brothers' The Price of Love, Plant and Krauss, along with Burnett, take the edge off.
Yeah.
Where they extract the pretty, laying there within the quirky and the twangy of the originals. Now, if the originals didn't seem all that wistful or contemplative or moody before, maybe they will now on a return to those originals.
Yeah, as someone who's a big Calexico fan myself, I really didn't like what Plant and Krauss did with Quattro, because the original Calexico version from 2003's amazing album, Feast of Wire, it's spooky, it's haunting, it's got this resonant this resonating darkness to it, and I kind of feel like T-Bone kind of like took that out of this record and just made it like he Americanized it a little too much.
Yeah, well, but here's the thing. Yeah, the original Quattro, it's very much in the Joey Burns wheelhouse of the Sonoran Valley spin on Mexican music. He's got that film noir edge, with the horns and the clicking percussion and all of that. I like this version better, only in the sense that I think that sort of gentle lilting piano key, the softer vocals, like you really get the moodiness of the song. I think it really kind of befits the mystery of the song a little bit more than the Burns quirky, more not clever, but sort of more amped up style does. And so the main point being here is that you're taking stuff that's already kind of wacky and de-wackyizing it. Yeah. Which is at least in these two instances, is not what they did on Raising Sand.
Yeah, on Raising Sand.
I will say this, though. There are some highlights, and there are some times when they do approach more of the nightmare than the dream, as I said. There are, Allison Krauss has just got some beautiful vocals on this record at times. She has a really haunting spin on an old Bert Jantz tune. That's your buddy Bert Jantz.
Yeah,
don't bother me. It don't bother me. Which I like that here. They also have these really pretty sprinkles of pedal steel underneath the arrangement of Merle Haggard's ballad, Going Where the Lonely Go, which again Krauss dominates and does lead vocal on. There's actually a really good original on here that Robert Plant and T-Bone Burnett wrote themselves called High and Lonesome. It's got that sort of slightly bluesy thing that Zeppelin used to do, where they would do these. They were more rock songs with a little hint of blues, and think more sort of the like the Boogie with Stu kind of stuff. So we have that, and then what I think is the best thing on the record, and you may disagree with me, Arturo, is I like their cover of Can't Let Go on this. And that's
I really don't like it at all.
Yeah, but let me explain this. And it's really interesting, and I think it's cool the way they do it. So Can't Let Go has had an interesting path over the 25 or almost 30 years of its existence. It was written by a guy named Randy Weeks, who never really had success on his own. I think released like an album or two. Got some critical praise, but he had this song called Can't Let Go, which he recorded, I believe it was in 1989, I want to say. Somewhere around there. His version sounds like the kind of thing that the house band from the movie Roadhouse would have played. You know, there's no real tricks to the arrangement. It's just straightforward bar, country bar rock.
And then Lucinda Williams recorded the definitive version of that song. Yes,
and then Lucinda Williams takes it and gets this really sexy acoustic like swing and twang out of it, and like quote unquote revs it up, but it's an acoustic guitar, and you can tell like her and Roy Bittan really had a lot of fun working on that, and so it gets this kind of rollicking. It's just her and the guitar performance here, though. And again, this goes to show you it's a fabulous lesson on how brilliant artists and producers and arrangers can find the hidden spaces in the songs of brilliant songwriters. Who knew that Can't Let Go had a Bo Diddley beat somewhere hidden in there? And so, boom, ba-ba-dum, 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 ba-dum, ba-dum, one of those Bo Diddley beats. And here, Can't Let Go gets a really cool little Bo Diddley beat.
The Lucinda version implied the Bo Diddley beat. She just didn't put it on there, but you can hear it on Lucinda's version. It's implied,
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah, exactly. But it's not. Even then, I guess you could say it's subtle. She's got the little skitter going.
Yeah.
She's got the little skitter, and it's almost like a skitter and pat. It's almost like, it's a skitter and pat swing. Whereas here, it's definitely just a straightforward chug. Not quite Johnny Cash and Bo Diddley were different, but this still I think is closer to Diddley than Cash. Sure. But a really neat trick. This is really all to say that other critics and writers out there who I've read cover this album and in their interviews with Plant and Krauss have referred to this as a exercise in lightning striking twice. I ain't going that far.
No, it isn't. Yeah,
because this album is softer and poppier and more self-conscious than Raising Sand. Why? Because they caught lightning in a bottle once, they realized it, and so now it's self-conscious. It's like, oh, we are doing it again, and can we outdo ourselves, or can we even come close to matching that? Look, then it was magic. Now it's still cool, but let's not toot the celebratory horns too loudly. So we are leaving the countrified, twangified parallel universe where the cowboys are actually still dangerous, and we are now re-entering this world
where we're going to enter a stone temple.
Yes, really looking forward to this. In defense of Stone Temple Pilots. What is there to defend about fucking Stone Temple Pilots? Tell us, Arturo.
Yes, well, let me give some context here for all you listeners out there. In the last episode, as our millions and millions of curmudgeonly fans would know, we started a new series called A Legacy. You insert artist name, ellipses, A Legacy, where we focused on the discography, legacy, and influence / importance of a band / artist people don't generally think of. And we started this series with one of our very best episodes. Again, thanks to author Ronan Gavoni for being our guest. Go check out his book, Not For You, Pearl Jam and the Present Tense, covering the career arc of the legendary band Pearl Jam. Well, we figured it would be a great idea to start another series by transitioning from Pearl Jam to a band who in the 1990s was accused by many critics of essentially ripping Pearl Jam off and calculatedly riding the grunge tidal wave in the 1990s. This band, of course, is Stone Temple Pilots, and the name of this new series is In Defense Of. In this series, we will take a band / artist or an individual album that are either critically derided or commercially ignored, or both, and take the time to analyze their work in the case of a band and artist, defend said work, and argue why these bands or albums deserve re-examination and retrospective appreciation. We think STP is a perfect band to kick off this series because in the 1990s, no band were as polarizing in regard to populist fans versus snooty hipster music critics and snooty hipster music fans. Not even Pearl Jam, got that much derision as these guys did. Now, STP, did they deserve the disrespect? We are going to argue hell fuck no. Also, we're going in depth into their peak period albums from the 1990s and present the case as to why they are better, and in some cases much better, than anyone remembers them being.
So the end of 2021 is drawing near. It's been a hell of a curmudgeonly journey through this post-COVID era. Or is it pre-COVID? Or is it post-COVID? Anyway, it's about that time where we start contemplating. What were the best popular music albums of the year? My pick for top albums? The list includes efforts from Lucy Dacus and Mdu Mokhtar. Arturo's list? He'll name Genesis Owasu and Idols, among others. Both of us would name Amyl and the Sniffers as one of this year's biggest winners. But what do you think? This is your podcast, after all. Tell us your picks for the albums, songs, and artists of the year. Weigh in by writing to us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or perhaps DM us at curmudgeonpod on Twitter. So now, let's start our defense of Stone Temple Pilots. When we press play on Stone Temple Pilots' debut album, Core, the first thing we hear on the opening song, Dead and Bloated, is singer Scott Weiland passionately and almost angrily singing the opening verse a cappella through a megaphone, and very, very articulately and passionately. It's a startling jumpstart to a really good album. Is it a better beginning than that of Nirvana's Nevermind or Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger? Of course not. But it's arguably on par. It signaled that STP was a band to take seriously. Their main sin, however, was that Core was released on September 29th, 1992. Those other two records I just mentioned were released on September 24th, 1991. So about a year and 5 days difference. If STP had released this record a year earlier, then we are arguably recording a very different episode tonight. Agree, Arturo?
Yeah, and which kind of brings me to the first myth, because for all you folks out there, Chris and I came up with 5 myths about Stone Temple Pilots, and you're alluding to the first one, Chris. What you said alluded to that. And the first myth of STP was that they were Pearl Jam wannabes. Now, I like the fact that you brought up the release of Core and when it was released, and specifically in addressing the first myth for STP, that they were Pearl Jam wannabes. If the first thing you ever watched by STP, like a lot of people, was the video for Plush, then yeah, I guess you can think that. He's got all of that video came out late 92, got big in early 93. He's copying all of Eddie Vedder's mannerisms and shit. And, Beavis and Butthead are making fun of him, and all on. But if you really look at the liner notes for Core, don't look at when it was released. It came out September 92. Look at when it was recorded.
Yes.
Core was recorded in late 1991, end of fall, early winter 1991, going into very early 1992. I have a really hard time believing that at that point, when they were recording Core, they had heard of Pearl Jam.
Right. Or had heard of Nirvana, actually.
I'm sure they knew Nirvana a little bit back then, but they really barely, if did not know Pearl Jam at all. So if you're going to call them a wannabe of anybody, the closest comparison, I think, if you are to do that, I would say STP were kind of sort of Alice in Chains wannabes, because Dead and Bloated sounds a lot like Alice in Chains.
Yeah,
that I'll buy that, but not Pearl Jam.
A little bit. I mean, it's that grunge soul thing going on. So yeah, no, they were not Pearl Jam wannabes. I think you hit the nail on the head, Arturo, that I think most people, their introduction to STP was when Plush went into heavy rotation in the summer of 1993. Yeah. For me, I don't know if I'm an exception, but I remember this Sex Type thing hit MTV in January of 1993. It was either December of 92 or January 93 when it went into rotation. I saw that, and I remember going to, I was a senior in high school. I remember going to school the next day and talking to a friend of mine, or mentioning to a friend of mine I'd seen this band, and this band's going to be just as big. And he looked at me like four heads. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Or who the hell are you talking about? Because he hadn't seen it yet. So they were not Pearl Jam wannabes, just because, yes, I mean, by push, you've got Scott Weiland making faces for the camera. And again, it's all timing. It was the summer of 1993 that grunge was at its fever pitch in terms of people really getting on board. And, remember in September of 93, Eddie Vedder made the cover of Time. Yeah. And so Plush had the nerve to hit the air at the exact same time. Here's a funny thing. Now, you remember Eddie Vedder was in San Diego, up until the end of 1990 when the Pearl Jam guys, Gossard and Ament, and those guys discovered him. Well, I know in an interview with Cameron Crowe a few years later, Vedder professed, I never even heard of those guys when I was in San Diego. So, they had performed as Mighty Joe Young. That was their name at first. And they were a relatively young band before they got their deal, and they had only been around for like a year or so before then. So, yeah, they were kind of doing their own thing. Grunge hadn't even become a neon word when they were recording that. Again, maybe they were a little familiar with Nirvana because, Nirvana at least had some indie cred through Bleach, and Smells Like Teen Spirit was coming up through the radio ranks in that fall. But no, they were doing their own thing, and to a point, as we said earlier, it was a little bit of a misfortune that most people were introduced to STP through Plush, which hit if the album dropped at the wrong time, the video dropped at the really, really, really wrong time when grunge was at its fever pitch. Yeah, that's an excellent point, that it took a year for the album to get out. And by the time it got out, of course they were going to be looked at as derivative, because that was the beginning of, I guess you could say, the second wave, which coincidentally included Candlebox.
Yeah, and later Bush. And now which brings us to the second myth about Stone Temple Pilots. And the second myth is that they were a grunge band. Now,
no.
Well, here's the thing. Had their careers stopped after Core, okay, maybe you can call them that. But from the second album, Purple, onward, they really progressively started throwing the shackles of grunge off, and they were exploring to other areas of rock that weren't anywhere near grunge. Like later on with, they started getting into more melodic Beatlesy territory, getting more into Bowie type stuff with the Tiny Music album, getting more into glam in some ways as well with the fourth album. So, but from Purple onward, they started cutting the cords of grunge off a little bit. So,
absolutely. Absolutely.
By the end, they were not even close to a grunge band.
Oh, not at all. And I don't even think they were really a grunge band to begin with. I think that they were a very riff-heavy, hard rock, maybe even metal band. They obviously were just as influenced by Kiss as a lot of the other West Coast bands, we'll call it. And obviously, the obvious sign that they weren't a grunge band is they weren't from fucking Seattle. They were these nobodies from San Diego. All the bands that made it big were either on their second iteration of a band or had been toiling in obscurity for 5 years. No, they were just some dudes that knew each other in San Diego. They got together. Robert DeLeo, who's their main songwriter, knew his riffs. But as time went on, those riffs went from being crunchy to being fuzzy. Purple is where things start to get fuzzy and where things start to get weird. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I consider Vasoline one of the weirdest songs to be a staple of alt-rock radio or modern rock radio. You don't hear it much anymore, but no, like you said, by the time we get to the second half of the album, number 4, there's as much bossa nova going on
Yeah.
as there is Kiss.
Yeah, I mean, which comes to the third myth about Stone Temple Pilots, that they were not original or did not have their own sound. Now, that is really bullshit, because people focus so much on who STP were trying to sound like when they weren't really trying to sound like them. And they don't focus on as much as how no one else in rock radio in the 90s sounded like Stone Temple Pilots. Not the Pumpkins, not Bush, not Pearl Jam, not Soundgarden, not Alice in Chains. None of those bands were incorporating Bowie, Beatles, and Bossa Nova into their sound the way STP were doing. Nobody.
Yeah, and the only one of those bands that you could really say that maybe their melodies were lovely, maybe was Soundgarden, but Weiland just had his melodies or his the melodies that he would come up with were lovely. They were just sort of these pretty they had this sort of soaring. They could soar, or they could glide, or they could just sort of. They just had this sort of almost not psychedelic, but almost kind of like soothing, like rubbery effect to them. It was, and then the other thing too, and let's put a kind of a half myth in here. So we'll have 5.5 myths that Scott Weiland was a bad singer.
He wasn't. He was a very good singer.
No, not at all. The thing about it is everybody thought he was aping Vedder, because again, on Core, he does have that kind of, the kind of the moaning and growling. But as he goes along, at first he's singing from his belly. But then as he goes along, even on Core, like as it goes along, he goes from being in the belly to in the throat. And so it gets very throaty. And so he's got this kind of like almost raspy, throaty thing going on all through Tiny Music, which, we both agree is their best record. But even like that Dead and Bloated bit that we started this discussion with, he's more in that raspy, soulful, like Lou Reedy, Bowie kind of mode than he is in any sort of like grunge, sort of warbly superhero.
Now, myth number 4 or 4.5, that they were just a singles band. Now, Stephen Thomas Erlewine is a music critic for allmusic.com. I'm a big fan of Erlewine. I really like his writing.
Yeah, he's a very good writer. He's a contemporary of ours, by the way. He's not.
He is. He's in his mid-40s. He wrote that STP because he was giving a review to their greatest hits collection. Thank you. And he called it, quote, nearly perfect. And in the review, he said that STP were the best straight-ahead rock singles outfit of their time. Now, that is a compliment. That's a very good compliment to them. But they are more than just that. And I've always felt that. Even Core. Core is a really good album, man. If you sit down and divorce yourself from the grunge mania of the time. Just sit down and listen to Core. That is a badass, fucking kick-ass rock and roll record. And Purple is an evolution from that into exploring the psychedelia and glam. Tiny Music goes even further. And then number 4 is where it all coalesced when they really became their own band. Those first four albums are phenomenal, all 4 of them.
Now, I'll kind of admit that, I'm with Erlewine, or for most of my life since SDP hit the scene, I've been with Erlewine. I've made the joke many times, and we've repeated it several times in the history of this podcast, that SDP was the Jethro Tull of the 1990s. And I will say this, Thank You, the album that Erlewine was reviewing, is an absolutely essential part of any strong rock and roll collection, especially if you want 90s rock. You have to have the album Thank You, because it really does. It captures those 2 or 3 great songs from each of those records, and it compiles, and it's like 13 songs, and it is perfect because it captures the best of the best. Were they a great singles band? Yes. But like Arturo had just said, they weren't just a great singles band. And I have come to embrace that as I've gotten older. Like you said, Core with stuff like Cracker Man, Purple with like Pretty Penny. And so, you can point to like deep album cuts on each one of those records. And like even like Tiny Music and Down, all of a sudden not only is Weiland proving that he's a good singer, he's not even rock singing. He's just plain old singing. He's crooning in some spots.
He was a great singer.
Yeah, and some of those ballads, like on the second half of Tiny Music, there's some really lovely balladry that goes on there. So yeah, were they a great singles band? Actually, yes, they were the best singles band of their era. I would say without much of a doubt. But yeah, it definitely went beyond that. All 5 of these records of the first iteration of STP are worth your investment and worth a deeper dive because there are some real gifts and some real pleasures.
Right, exactly. And now the 5th and final myth, or 5.5, about STP is that they were not respected by their peers. Now, let me go to some quotes here. Of course, I got these from Wikipedia. But this is an MTV writer named James Montgomery who published an article about music critics and their opinions in the 1990s. And when he got Stone Temple Pilots, this is what he said, quote, "All I'm suggesting is that perhaps it's time to admit that we were wrong about them from the get-go, that we treated them unfairly." Let's see. Erlewine, in that same review, said STP made music that sounded great at the time and even better now, and that their music has stood the test of time. Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah, that was the quote I found. Yep.
Yeah. Right after Scott Weiland died in 2015, called him one of the greatest voices of their generation. He says, quote, "It was, I guess you say, my way of apology for having been And another quote, this one is from Billy Corgan, the lead singer, guitarist from Smashing Pumpkins, after Scott Weiland died. And he paid tribute to him. It was in December 2015. And basically, he called him one of the greatest voices of their generation. This is what Corgan said, quote, "It was, I'd guess you'd say, my way of apology for having been so critical of STP when they appeared on the scene like some crazy man-fueled rocket. And not only was the knight up front freshly handsome to a fault, but he could sing too, as any supreme actor gives a real and different voice to each character played. It was STP's 3rd album that had got me hooked." He's referring to Tiny Music, Songs from the Vatican Gift Shop. "A wizardly mix of glam and post-punk, and I confessed to Scott, as well as the band many times, how wrong I had been in assessing their native brilliance. And like Bowie can and does, it was Scott's phrasing that pushed his music into a unique and hard to pin down aesthetic sonic sphere. Lastly, I'd like to share a thought which, though clumsy, I hope would please Scott in hominem. And that is, if you ask me who I truly believed were the great voices of our generation, I would say it were he, Lane, and Kurt. Lane being Lane Staley of Alice in Chains, and Kurt being Kurt Cobain. Yeah, they were respected by their peers, needless to say.
Yeah. Well, 2 things. One, I would hope that Billy Corgan would say that because, Weiland even back then was probably a more profound voice of his generation than Billy Corgan was.
Sure.
So there's that. But I think that one of the threads running through those quotes you just said is that maybe they were respected, but they weren't respected enough.
Yeah.
That they did have their respect, and I think that even here's a story that I can give you to show the kind of respect that SDP had fans. They had metal fans hooked back then, like the people that were like metal fans, not like grunge fans. You and I kind of came onto it. We graduated from classic rock, and then Nirvana changed our lives.
Yeah.
Well, we had a friend in college. Maybe this is an excuse to turn him on to our podcast, Brian Gruda, who was a diehard Misfits, Danzig, Black Flag kind of guy. And by 1997, 98, he was professing that his favorite album of all time was Purple by Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah.
So the metalheads got got Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah.
Like I said, the big riffs. Dean DeLeo's playing. Weiland's histrionics and theatricality in his voice and in his vocals, and the sort of the showiness that SDP kind of embraced in their stuff. No, they definitely they deserve more respect than they got.
On this episode, we started a new series that defends the recorded legacies of much maligned bands or individual albums that are overlooked. For the next episode, there is no overlooking what Chris and I believe is the greatest hip-hop album ever made. I will not say what album it is in this promo. However, I'll give a small hint and say this year, which is coming to an end soon, marks the 30th anniversary of the release of this irrefutable masterpiece. Join us for the final Curmudgeon Rock Report of this calendar year as Chris and I dive deep into the background and making of this enduring classic, why it mattered then and why it still matters today. Email us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at curmudgeonpod.
All right, now let's go into STP's career arc. And I think we can really divide them into parts and eras. I should say, we've kind of put them into 6 parts. The first 4 of which are by far the best and the ones we're going to focus on. Part 1 basically is the formation from 1985 to 1992, when the DeLeo brothers, Robert, the one with the short hair, he's the bass player, Dean with the long hair is the guitarist, and when they met Scott Weiland. Now, here's the thing. There are 2 stories about how Weiland met the DeLeos. One was that Weiland and bassist Robert DeLeo met at a Black Flag concert in Long Beach, California in 85. They were discussing their girlfriends only to realize they were dating the same woman. I don't know if that's really true or not, but however, supposedly instead of letting this come between them, they developed a bond, they formed a band, and they broke it off with the girl. Each of them broke off with the girl. However, in his autobiography, Weiland, his memoir from 2012, he kind of presented a very different version, saying that he and his friends and their band were big fans of Robert DeLeo's bass playing. They saw him play in a show, and they invited him to join them for some gigs, and it kind of went from there. But anyway, other band members drifted. The DeLeos and Weiland stayed close together. They saw the drummer Eric Kretz play in a Long Beach club, convinced him to join the band. For a little while, the band was called Swing. Then they changed, but that didn't last very long. And then what they did is that after they convinced Robert's brother Dean to join Swing, he hated the name Swing, Dean. So they changed the name to Mighty Joe Young. So a lot of the songs that ended up on Core were basically Mighty Joe Young songs. And they recorded a demo in 1990.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
The reason that they had to change the band's name, they had trademark issues, because I think Mighty Joe Young referred back to a monster movie, or it was like a B-list King Kong franchise of some kind.
Actually, no, that was one thing. There was 2 things. It was that, and the second thing is that they got a call from a lawyer who informed them, their lawyer, that there was a blues musician already had the name Mighty Joe Young.
Okay.
So it's both.
Yeah, well, there you go. So then they did that, and then of course, I'm assuming, I know that the Wikipedia and the fan page stuff, they go on to this, that who knows, maybe they were stoned or something, and they liked the STP gas station logo,
the motor oil. Yeah, I think that's true though. I think that one is actually true. Is how they found their name STP, and they settled on the name Stone Temple Pilots. But anyway, interesting to know that the Mighty Joe Young demo that has several of the songs on Core already there had included elements of funk, which you would never believe with STP, and a little bit of yodeling even. But anyway, They changed their name to Stone Temple Pilots. They went into they got the 92 early 90 not early 92. It was earlier than that, 91. They signed with Atlantic. Atlantic wanted to get their band, their kind of they want to get their piece of the alternative rock pie. And like I said earlier, they recorded Core in late 91, early 92. It took a really long time for them to release the album, but they released it in September 92. It really took off in early 93, like you said, Chris, with those singles, Sex Type Thing, which got moderate, airplay, and then Plush took off like a rocket. And then STP became stars.
Yes, I mean, they do have some pop sensibilities. They show a little bit of flourishes. They have a little bit of acoustic stuff going on there. They've got the like Dead and Bloated is a fabulous song to me because what is it? It's like this hybrid of soul, blues, and like Black Sabbath. I mean, it has that kind of sludgy tempo, but there's a lot of this sort of soul going on. The vocals are interesting in there. I think there's this odd tension of this sort of big, huge, bass heavy, bottom heavy guitar and bass with all this reverb and echo going on around it, and it leads to an interesting effect. I think, like we said before, Plush is the one. I mean, just this week, in the last 2 days, my modern rock station, I've heard Plush and I've heard Interstate Love Song. Neither of which will ever die. And once in a while, you still hear Sex Type Thing on modern rock radio.
Here's the thing about Sex Type Thing. Even at the time, the band was getting a bit of attention for the lyrics, the rapey lyrics, if you will.
But people didn't understand that they were anti-rapey.
Yeah. I mean, like Cobain with Polly. It was basically Scott Weiland singing in character of a creepy stalker type dude. Of course, the video didn't help, where you see a shirtless Scott Weiland with chains
pink
flying
hair
all over the place,
pink
hair, and looking like a rapist. But the song really wasn't that. It was him being in character. Now, at that point in Scott Weiland's career, he probably wasn't skilled enough as a lyricist to do the Randy Newman thing, the writing in character.
I would say that Randy Newman probably had a leg up on Scott Weiland, but
on that,
but and that's the thing. So I guess one of my points is that people will remember this album and this era for Plush and for the radio friendliness of it, and again, the sort of the anti or the kind of pushback it immediately got as being, again, a year too late. But that's not fair, because the album starts with Dead and Bloated and Sex Type Thing, which is a great 1-2 wallop. We should mention that the gifted one here, as a showman and as a singer and as an interpreter, Scott Weiland was very talented. The gifted one here, though, is Robert DeLeo.
The guitarist is Dean. Robert is the bassist. Okay.
Robert wrote the songs.
Oh, really? Really?
If you look at the writing credits, he wrote most of the hits. There were a couple of exceptions. Dean DeLeo and Eric Kretz wrote Sex Type Thing, but Plush and most of the rest of it, and then on through Big Empty and a lot of that stuff with the kick-ass radio riffs. Right. That was Robert DeLeo. So he was. Oh, wow. He was a force there. So they came with a very strong, very orthodox, but also very interesting album that was very underrated and very slept on, for the simple reason that, and it happens more than it should in rock, that it's almost a truism enough to where you can say it, that a lot of times the worst song on an artist's album becomes the biggest hit.
Which leads up to the part 2 of their career arc, the 93-94 period. Now, this period is really important for 2 parts, for 2 things especially. First off, they were touring all over the place in 1993. And this is when Scott Weiland started getting into heroin. and specifically when STP were touring with the Butthole Surfers. In '93, the Butthole Surfers were on tour. Gibby Haynes, the lead singer, the insane lead singer of the Butthole Surfers, was a full-blown heroin junkie at the time. And it's very much speculated. I don't know if Weiland ever confirmed it in his memoir, but people around him always said that, it was this tour with the Buttholes that Weiland started doing heroin because, he got turned on to it by Gibby Haynes.
Yeah, I was going to say, if anybody's going to turn you on to heroin, it might as well be Gibby, otherwise known as Kurt's last roommate in rehab.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so that's the beginning of Weiland's drug problems, and he had a lot of them. And also, this is like the recording, and then going into '94, the release of an album that, in the eyes of many, and especially these two curmudgeons, validated Stone Temple Pilots, and that is Purple, which had more hits, to more inescapable ear candy riffs that just really were all over rock radio, and were all great songs. The song that made it to the Crow soundtrack, Big Empty, which I still say is STP's best ballad. As a power ballad, it's just unparalleled. It's the way the song moves, those jazzy chords in the beginning, and then just soars for the chorus. The other big hits, Interstate Love Song, you mentioned, Vasoline. I love Silver Gun Superman, Unglued, a great riff band with one of their best riffs.
Oh yeah. I mean, and my untrained ear, I mean, obviously I'm not like, look, I'm like your classic music critic. I don't know much about music itself, but when I hear Unglued, I hear 1.5 chords.
Yeah.
But yes. Yeah. That little veer off. Hey, shit is simple, Yeah. Like Ain't Talking About Love by Van Halen's the same thing,
Yeah, sure. And of course, they have the song that off Purple that I've really, really come to love is the third track, Loungefly.
Oh,
which is like it's basically their tribute to Jane's Addiction in a way,
Oh yeah, fun stuff. I said it's a really eclectic record. Like Pretty Penny is a really quirky, twangy little kind of blues. What would you call it? Like a blues ballad, like a folky, bluesy ballad.
Yeah, it's a folky song.
And so it's just I think it's a strong, well sequenced record. I think that there's a diversity in there. That was pretty uncommon. Even back then, I mean, the combination of the melodies and the crunch that you got. Right. But then, to me, the standout on that album always will be, and I always am still feel a little perplexed when I hear it, is Vaseline.
Yeah.
Because that was the song that this band chose as the first single off this record.
Right.
Can you imagine?
I know. It's a great, really weird 2-minute rock song with a weird time signature and just this mesmerizing, like monotonous riff, but it works.
Yeah, and the way it comes in with that sort of that buzzing, like weird, it's this just rising, buzzing, not even a riff, but just kind of sound. But with this like swinging, like basically like a swinging funk, and the drums are recorded and mixed to almost sound bongo like, and so it's just a very strange. It's like acid rock jazz with a little bit of Jane's Addiction. I think it has that that melody to it, and that's also when you start to get a sense that Weiland wasn't a singer so much as he was a vocal artist.
Yeah.
That he could kind of play characters, and so he could slip into the belly, like the full throated, or the full blast of the voice. Yeah, but he could go from like the verse, he's roar down here, but then he could do this, and it all works. Wherever he is in the song. And so it kind of leads to this woozy feeling of inertia. I mean, it's wonderfully inert rock and roll, I guess is the way you can put it.
Yeah.
And Big Empty's the same thing, by the way. It's wonderfully
I love
inert.
That song. Yeah. I mean, Purple is the album that proved that STP really more than a singles band. They should have been more of an AOR, Led Zeppelin type band, an album cuts band. And that kind of leads us to the next part of their career arc, the part 3, the 95 to 97 period. And basically we're now entering the era of arguably their best album. In my opinion, it's not even close. Tiny Music, Ellipses, Songs from the Vatican Gift Shop, which legitimized the band artistically. This is when music critics started to turn around and say, hey, maybe these guys are pretty good. Tiny Music should have had as many, well, it did have hits, but it should have been bigger than Core and Purple. And one of the reasons it wasn't is because they just couldn't tour for it, because Weiland had issues, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, they tried. They had to, I mean, they started, and this kind of became one of the MOs of the rest of the band's history, is that they would start tours but not finish them, or they would have to cancel tours altogether. Yeah. But also it got in the way of them promoting the record too, because, you know, you have to go out there and do the interviews and you have to push, but Weiland at this point had blown himself out so bad that he wasn't available. But like you said, which is too bad. And so go back to 96. The grunge train is now falling off the tracks. Obviously, Kurt Cobain's been dead for a couple of years. Pearl Jam has successfully alienated all the dude bros, as we talked about on the last episode, and gotten themselves down to a very comfortable hardcore fan base of about 1.5 million. Screaming Trees, as Lee Conner has admitted, it took them 2.5 years to get their record out, Dust, and that was 2 years too long because it came out and it tanked. It absolutely tanked. Soundgarden was on their downside, and you know, they headlined that year's Lollapalooza, which was kind of a bust. It was them and Metallica, and kind of gave Lollapalooza a bad name. And they started to not like each other, and they were falling down the charts, so they ended up breaking up. And so here comes SDP, and they're actually sounding fresh. Yeah, you could say that in the eyes of the rock world, they are sounding fresh, and they are not sounding like anything else on the radio. First song off that record is Bang Bang Baby, which I love. That is just a terrific song because it combines.
It's garage glam.
That's a good way to put it. It is absolutely grunge glam because it's
not garage glam. Garage glam. Yeah,
garage glam. Yeah, there you go. Because it's very garagey on the verses. And then it gets to the bridges and it turns into, like, again, you know, T-Rex is a good corollary. And, you know, this sort of, I don't know, like even like kind of that Frampton-y kind of stuff from the mid-70s as well. There's that. I love Press Play off that record. And then to me, it has their singular and their best. This album has their best song and their funniest song on it. Yeah. In my opinion, their best song, Lady Picture Show, which is
I agree. Definitely one of their top 5 singles ever. Great song.
Because one, it rocks. 2, it has a very clever, unique, and wondrous riff to it. But it has this sort of kind of ballady, almost romantic swing to it. Yeah. While also having a kick-ass solo by Dean Dalio, and you know, Weiland having that ability to have his voice become an instrument in this case, you know, he sings it so thin that it fits neatly into the sort of that core melody in the middle. It's like it's in its own pocket, so it's fantastic. And then it has their funniest song on it, which is Art School Girl.
I love that song.
I mean, it's really
it's goofing on the pretentious indie hipster douchebags. Who have come to hate STP all these years, you know.
Yeah, exactly, and it's very, very tongue in cheek, it's very cheeky, it's very tongue in cheek, and but like you also said, it's also a nice, very good fuck you to this idea of all the lunkheads that are after the hippie chick in the bar, and then when the hippie chick turns out to be too hippie chick for them.
Yeah.
thing.
They don't want to go there anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And then like even then, like at the end, you get some of the ballady stuff towards the end where he's really actually singing, and crooning. And so
Seven Cage Tigers is a great vocal performance. Daisy's a great vocal. His vocals are on for a guy who was ravaged by heroin and drugs. Like he's doing his best vocal work.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like I said, for most of the record, he goes from having that growl of 3 years earlier, which is the one that got him all the, he's ripping off Eddie Vedder. No, he's not. He's just doing a growl that serves those bell ringing, awesome Sabbathy kind of songs. Now we're getting into this more sort of melodic, trippy 70s thing, and he's singing throaty. But then he has those vulnerable songs where he's just singing.
Yeah,
absolutely, just singing and singing beautifully. And so that's like you said it, Art. I mean, I think by this time they've gone from sounding like everybody else supposedly to sounding like nobody else.
Two more things about I want to say about Tiny Music. Rolling Stone magazine at the end of '93. The Rolling Stone Readers Poll had STP as the year's worst band, worst new band. However, 2 years later, when this album comes out, they gave it a glowing review. I think this is why I say this is the beginning of music media starting to like soften up on STP. And they made it to the cover of Rolling Stone in February '97.
And that's, but the thing is, but that's the other thing too. I think by then, and it became a theme for like 5 years afterward. It was starting to dawn on people that Scott Weiland was a singularly great frontman.
Yeah.
In terms of his charisma, in terms of his personality, in terms of that sort of rock and roll chameleon. Ability. And just as they started to realize it is when he was starting to struggle and become a, not a public, what would you call it? Not a scourge or, kind of he was becoming infamous.
He became a headline gossip news story with all his druggy shit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, 99 being the worst, being basically the worst of it, but you're getting to that.
And then like the next period and the last important period artistically for them is basically the 1998 to 2000 period, which is number 4, which I think is a horribly, terribly underrated record. Number 4, in my opinion, proves that Tiny Music was no fluke. The band had more hit singles again. Sour Girl became a huge hit on rock radio in 2000. And really it was the band's last hurrah as a major band. And you can tell, like, captured perfectly on YouTube. You can find August 2001, STP played a show at the Rolling Rock Town Fair, and they were the headliner. And it is a fantastic show. They are just on. But this is like during the touring for Shangri-La Dida, which comes later. Let's focus on number 4. When number 4 came out, it was recorded in late 98. They started at. It took a long time. Released in late 99. And it was kind of like a back to basics rock album, or conceived as it for them. And the eclecticism of Tiny Music is still there, but the heavy rock stuff is really freaking heavy. At this point, as if they're trying to compete with Korn all of a sudden,
The heavy stuff is the heaviest it's ever been. I would say the best riff in the entire SDP catalog is Down. I love Down.
That's a monolith riff.
That song is fucking King Kong. And just really, really great stuff. And it actually has kind of a funny lyric, the whole "pleased to meet me" idea and all of that. Kind of, it's a good exercise in self-loathing. Now, this is one blind spot in my research, but I remember because this is when I was in my MTV days of writing back then.
Yeah.
Weiland, one of the things that makes this album or this period kind of notorious is this album either is released during or just before Weiland has to go to prison has to go to jail for like 8 months.
Yeah.
Because he kept getting himself arrested for drugs.
Right.
And so they couldn't tour on this album. So it's not that they couldn't. It's not that they had to cancel tours. They just couldn't tour.
Yeah.
During this time. And so they put this album out there. Like you said, they got a hit with Sour Girl, which is one of their gentler songs.
Sure.
And then obviously Down was out there, and they at this point they're starting to get their sort of cult. I think that they're starting to get their cult that was going to go with them long term. And like we said before, by this time they are a critic's darling. I would say that they are a more of an intelligentsia darling. Certainly at the time. I mean, the reason that we were covering Weiland and them as aggressively as we were is because they had become kind of a fascinating artistic outfit. The other thing, obviously,
artistic is a fascinating artistic story. It's like if a band, imagine if a band started out as the Monkees and then like ended up as David Bowie.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's the thing. It's they started out in a zeitgeist, and then they're one of the very few bands in the world. There's very few bands that have been able to escape their zeitgeist and grow, or detach themselves from their zeitgeist and find an existence outside of it.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's what are some examples? I mean, the Stones kind of did it.
The Beatles.
The Beatles. But, the Stones kind of, more accurately would be the Kinks. That the Kinks, they had the, You Really Got Me phase. And then they were able to, they didn't sell records, but they were able to do the Village Green stuff. And then they came back to selling records with Lola and Rock and Roll Fantasy and Come Dancing and all that stuff. So that's a good example of a band that kind of was able to shapeshift. And by number 4, with all the bossa nova stuff that goes in there and all those sort of weirdly slinking, crooning, almost jazz-like ballads. That are in number 4. They were a chameleon of a band. Weiland had chameleon-like tendencies as a front man. He was. They had a song called "Days of the Week." He was in the Hair of the Week club, and the way that they could shift the styles. I mean, the one consistency that they had was that Dean Dalio shred throughout the entire course of the catalog. Great riff banger in terms of his ability to get that sound on those riffs, but he could also solo like a mother too. So yeah, a lot of good stuff there. I mean, in terms of this other thing, I guess I'll ask you this question now, Artur, since we're supposed to be defending STP. What would you say the legacy of Scott Weiland is, and what would you say the legacy of STP is in a sentence or two? If you had to do a short argument, a summation of the argument of their legacy, how would you do it?
Scott Weiland as a if you insist on calling Stone Temple Pilots a grunge band, and I don't, but if other people do, okay, fine. Then I'll say Scott Weiland was the most versatile vocalist of that whole group. He was more versatile. I love Eddie Vedder, of course, but he was more versatile than Vedder, more versatile than Cobain, more versatile than even Lane Staley. Chris Cornell was probably the only one of those. He was pretty damn versatile himself. Cornell had the power, but Weiland had the versatility and the eclecticism in his voice. And as a band, musically, STP, and you hit the nail on the head, they were the more chameleon-like of those bands. Now, we don't know, because what Nirvana would have been had Cobain lived. But STP were the most musically, arguably the most. I don't know if they had the richest discography, but they had one of the most interesting and the most eclectic, stylistically eclectic discography of all those other grunge bands. And Weiland was the most versatile vocalist. Best heard, and one of the best examples of this is the final track on number 4, Atlanta, which is this beautiful, lush breakup ballad that has all like this. It has these amazing like string arrangements for STP. Are you kidding me? Yes.
Yeah. Where'd that come from? Yeah.
Stringer. It's this epic breakup ballad. And it's just a soaring, beautiful song that just kind of lingers and fades out. And it's like it's the perfect song to end not just an album, but really a discography. If you think about it, it's arguably the most beautiful song that band ever crafted in the studio.
12 Bar Blues.
Really underrated album.
Yeah, it's a kind of a strange record. I mean, Weiland, I think he has I don't know if he wrote all the music. He has he worked with a guy for a long time that was kind of his songwriting partner. But it's a strange record, but it's pretty cool actually. It definitely I don't know if he was aiming to sell any records with that, but it was just kind of Weiland kind of doing his thing. And I think this is another part of the mythology of STP that, when we think of STP, we automatically think of Scott Weiland. But a question I've had over the years is, could you imagine what it was like to be the Delio brothers? That they were kind of they were the engine. He might have been the driver, but they were the engine, like writing the songs and doing those arrangements. And Eric Kretz, I guess, deserves some credit too. But the Delios, think about the challenge. So not only did they have to accept being overshadowed, by this peacock that they have fronting the band, but then they have to keep the band going when he starts to go in the shitter, personally and health wise. And so the fact that they were able to keep things stable enough to get Tiny Music and number 4 as clean and as sweeping and as beautiful as they were. And not only that, but the fact that they could even survive for us to talk about the next important part. That's a setup. Is kind of a miracle in and of itself that they actually, and this was another one. This was kind of the last hurrah where they actually tried to do the album stuff again, and do the tour. But tell us about this.
Yeah, well, what it is really, we're getting into what I would say part 5 of their story arc, 2001 to 2003. The band releases their 5th album, Shangri-La Dida, which isn't very good. It's kind of STP running out of gas. They have one good minor hit single, Days of the Week, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, good. It's by the numbers pop, but it's very good by the numbers pop.
Yeah. And but they went back to touring. Go on YouTube, check out the Rolling Rock Town Fair show from August 2001. STP is on. They're playing their hits. They're playing the deep album cuts, and Weiland's in great vocal form. The band's in great shape. It's just really, really, really good. If you want to see how good of a live band STP were when they were really like locked in. But this is their last tour for a while with the original lineup. They broke up in 2003. Pretty much done, right? And that's when the greatest hits compilation came out. Then we go into the part 6 part of the narrative arc. 2008 to 2015, the band reunites and does a lot of touring from 2008 to 2010. A lot of touring.
Yes.
As the original STP. They released their self-titled album, Stone Temple Pilots, in 2010. Doesn't do very well. Frankly, it's not very good. It's kind of by that point, who wants to actually buy the records? Or it's like Prince said, I could make the greatest record of all time here in my 50s, but at the end of the day, the radio programmers only care about those 5 songs. And I know.
STP is going to be in the same thing. So
sure.
So why not phone it in?
Yeah. Well, anyway, in any case, the interband tensions return. I suspect it was the drugs again, because he never really could get out of that, leading to Weiland being fired in 2013, and then they had a legal fight I think in 2013, 2014, over who can keep the name Stone Temple Pilots. It was Weiland and the other against the other three. The other three won out. Then oddly enough, Chester Bennington from Linkin Park joined STP for a little while as their lead singer. They record an EP that's not very good. Because come on, it's Chester Bennington from Linkin Park. Who gives a shit? And Bennington leaves within 2 years. Scott Weiland dies of a pills, alcohol, cocaine overdose in 2015. And that kind of puts the kibosh on STP. I mean, they did get after both Weiland and Bennington died. Bennington killed himself. I believe in 2017, was it, or 2016?
Yes. Yeah, it was either 2017 or 18. Yeah.
Yeah. So what they did in 2016, a year after Weiland died, they got this guy named Jeff Goot. I believe that's how you pronounce his name, Jeff Goot. Well, they were auditioning first, okay? And there were rumors circulating about a Filipino guy who's going to be the singer. Of course, that didn't happen. So they got this dude who was X Factor Season 3 runner-up, Jeff Goot, to be the lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots. And he's been with them ever since. And honestly, I don't acknowledge that as Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah,
I don't care what happens there.
That's the modern music business for you, where if you get on TV in one of these singing shows, you too could sing for Stone Temple Pilots.
Yeah,
the Judas Priest journey stories of the guys that are in cover bands or karaokeing, and just so happen now they work for their favorite bands. But like you said, it's ultimately a sad story that they were, like you said, they got to a point where they were so good live and had locked in, and they knew themselves as a band. They had that identity. They had that working relationship. It just was, it was Weiland and drugs. I mean,
Weiland and drugs. So we just talked about Stone Temple Pilots, and we made a point of saying that as they progressed in their discography, they started incorporating more Beatles and David Bowie influences into their music. Well, that is appropriate for what we're going to do now, because as you know, David Bowie had his life changed by the Velvet Underground when he listened to their first album. Back in 1966. He had the acetate for it before it came out in 67. And the Beatles and the Velvet Underground. What's their connection? Well, here's the connection. And that's that sound. That sound you hear.
The coins.
The coins. The beginning of our Vault segment, where we each take two classic albums from the past and shine a deserving light on them. However, this is a very special segment of the Vault. In fact, it is the first of its kind. As you may know or should know, two very well-known filmmakers have recently released two documentaries, one of which is actually a documentary series, each one profiling easily one of the 10 greatest and most influential bands of all time. Now, Todd Haynes, the first one, Todd Haynes, long having been one of America's most underrated directors, just put out the definitive, authoritative documentary about the Velvet Underground, simply titled The Velvet Underground. It's a wonderful film, one of the greatest music documentaries I've ever seen, and it's a kaleidoscopic menagerie of interview footage, 1960s pop cultural footage for context, and never before seen footage of the band both performing and just being themselves. You should really check it out. I'm not sure if it's on Amazon or one of the others. But anyway, on one of the other streaming services. So to honor Mr. Haynes' achievement, my Vault selection will be a Velvet Underground album, one that I think is their most overlooked. Now the other documentary is more high profile. Peter Jackson, most notable for his excellent Lord of the Rings movie trilogy and Academy Award-winning trilogy, has just released on Disney Plus a 7-hour and 40-minute epic divided into 3 parts about the Beatles' writing and recording sessions for their Get Back project in January 1969. About 40 hours of footage were shot during this very contentious time in the band's history, with their strained relations being in the forefront. The footage was eventually whittled down to a 1 hour and 20-minute documentary film called Let It Be, released a year later. What Jackson did was go back to the original footage and assemble this monolith of a film, or film series, that gives an expansive, larger in scope and more contextualized look into what was really going on with the Beatles at the time. Yes, relations were strained, but it was not all doom and gloom. If anything, these films are really about and a testimony to how a band of brothers who are growing apart for various reasons can somehow manage to keep it together enough to create great art. Of course, this series is called The Beatles Get Back, and Chris's vault selection will be an album from the Beatles' illustrious catalog, but not in the way you might expect. But first, we'll start with the Velvet Underground. Chris, are you ready for this?
I am. Oh, and it bears mentioning that the Todd Haynes documentary on VU is available on Apple TV, Apple TV Plus.
Okay,
that is the streaming service that has that.
Okay, or just go to the torrents and download it illegally, like I did.
well, there you go. He lives in South Korea, folks, so the fuzz can't get him.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, what album by the Velvet Underground am I going to talk about? All right. The album is White Light, White Heat from 1968. Now, the defining album of the Velvet's career, and the one that is on any respectable critic's short list of the greatest albums ever recorded, and justifiably so, is their debut, The Velvet Underground and Nico, from 1967. Although it was actually recorded and should have been released in 1966, it wasn't because the record label at the time had issues with the subject matter. We'll get into that later. But anyway, it's arguably the most influential album ever made, with at least 5 different subgenres of rock having been spawned by it. Their self-titled album from 1969 is also a popular favorite among fans and critics, mostly for that impeccable first half of the record, which has some of the most nakedly emotional and beautiful songs Lou Reed ever wrote. Candy Says, Pale Blue Eyes, etc. However, the second half of that album suffers from inconsistency and a couple of half-baked songs that should have been replaced by any of the large number of amazing outtakes the band had at the time. While still an incredible album and almost any other band's greatest moment, it's actually my least favorite VU album, although it's still a great album. And then you have their final album, 1970's Loaded, which, while being their most overtly commercial record, it also contains some of the most epic and enduring rock anthems Reed ever wrote. You know, Rock and Roll, Sweet Jane, New Age, etc. It's the album that proved the Velvets could make beautifully crafted, searingly catchy, tailor-made for radio rock and roll as good, if not better, than any other band. A strong case can be made that this is their second best album. However, I will not make that argument. The reason for that is that I believe the album that unfortunately gets lost in the shuffle and not mentioned as much as the others is their second album and last album with bassist, viola player, avant-garde, envelope pusher John Cale, that is White Light, White Heat from 1968. Now, there's been a lot of debate as to the origins of punk rock or where it came from, but the general and correct consensus is that the roots of punk rock lie in that onslaught of aggressive garage rock bands from the mid-1960s, most of whom were American, chronicled in the Nuggets box set series. They're little known, and most of them released no more than 2 to 5 singles. I, for one, have always and will maintain that the first real punk rock single was The Who's My Generation from 1965. If you think about what the hallmarks of punk rock are, anti-authoritative, angry, full of energy, confrontational, loud, My Generation has all of that and then some. And while the first official punk album is always argued to be somewhere between the Stooges' self-titled debut from 1969, produced by John Cale, by the way, and the Ramones' self-titled debut from 1976, my not-so-humble claim especially if you consider what the classic hallmarks of punk rock are, is that the VU's second album and the follow-up to the Velvet Underground and Nico is where punk rock was really born, in my opinion. White Light, the album, takes all the innovations of the first album, you know, the lyrical preoccupation with the sex and drugs underworld, the droning sound, the aggressive and atonal guitars, the allusions to avant-garde classical music, the understatedly pretty melodies. It takes all of that and just ramps them up to corrosive levels of noise, attitude, boldness, and just visionary invention, rarely and perhaps never seen or heard in rock music before.
Yeah, emphasis on the corrosion. When I first heard this record, you probably will remember this, Arturo, was basically what the fuck. I didn't get it, and I thought it sounded like shit. But that was kind of the point. It's beauty. It's kind of like having a beautiful plate of pasta that's loaded with nails. And so,
exactly.
And so you shit the nails. And so it becomes this kind of performative pain art, but it's some good stuff.
But the nail,
go ahead.
The nails give the pasta its flavor, its unique flavor.
Yes, it does.
There are only 6 songs on this album, but each song has not only influenced countless bands, but also likely inspired a bunch of people to start bands themselves. The first track is the title track, and it's this combustible flame of tribal rhythm noise rock with a subversive, knowingly catchy yet cheesy vocal melody. Drummer Maureen Tucker, the drummer of the band, her minimalist drum patterns are pumped with like steroid power, and Reed's and Sterling Morrison's guitars intertwine in this like battle over who can be louder and more dissonant. You know, lyrically, Reed rejoices in the speedy high of injecting amphetamines into your system. That's what the song's about. Yes.
Yep.
The Gift is the second track, and lyrically, it's a short story written by Reed, narrated by a hilariously deadpan John Cale, about a romantically obsessed guy who packages himself in a box to be sent to the woman he loves, only to find himself killed by a drill gun to the head while the woman tries to open the box. Musically, this whole thing is backed by this nasty, dirty, grimy rock groove that makes you wonder whether grunge wasn't another subgenre, birthed by the Velvets.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, and folks, if anyone has any notions of or any questions as to why Arturo ended up the way he did, it's because he grew up on stuff like this.
Yeah, no shit. And wait till we get to the next song.
Yeah.
Lady Godiva's Operation is the third track. And it slows things down a bit, but is by no means a ballad. It's this menacing mid-tempo groove and lead guitar sculpting something oddly melodic and beautiful out of feedback and noise that practically invented sonic youth. Lyrically, Cale is back, this time singing, quite beautifully even, Reed's lyrics about a sex change operation gone wrong. Yeah, needless to say, Lou Reed was not into cheery subject matter.
Nope.
The fourth track, Here She Comes Now, is the only song on the album that resembles a pretty ballad. It's a careful listen to the lyrics chorus, though. Oh, it looks so good, she's made out of wood, reveals Reed to be putting down a stuck-up woman, not unlike as he does in Femme Fatale from the first album. FYI, for your information, Chris and all the others listening out there, this song was covered amazingly by Nirvana back in 1992. Look it up on YouTube. The name of the song is Here She Comes Now. The fifth track, I Heard Her Call My Name, brings back the noise rock carnage with a viciousness that makes the title track almost tame. Reed introduces each searing, ear-shredding guitar solo with the pronouncement, and then my mind split open. It's one of the most riveting and gleefully abrasive recorded moments in rock history, in my opinion. And speaking of abrasive, we get to the last track, and 17.5-minute magnum opus, Sister Ray, arguably the Velvet Underground's signature song. In this song, Reed sings the, shall we say, charming story of a heroin-fueled sex orgy involving sailors and transvestites, where one person dies, leading to the police breaking the whole thing up. Now, what the hell kind of music do you come up with to back that story up? Well, what the VU came up with is an intense marathon of loud, pissed off, unholy, distorted guitars, pumped up to Spinal Tap's preferred 11, augmented by Cale's apocalyptic sounding Vox organ, and driven by Tucker's brilliant, subtly brilliant drumming, really, shifting in rhythm and time signatures throughout. It's one of the most intense, diabolical, ruthless, simply evil recordings in the history of 20th century music. And yes, I meant all those adjectives as compliments. If you think Marilyn Manson is scary rock music, you can fuck off.
No shit. Yeah, this is scary rock and roll.
Yeah.
So,
and as soon as the last note of Sister Ray ends, and you're finished listening to White Light, White Heat for the first time, all you're left with is this feeling of having your mind fried, then melted, your innocence being crushed, and your soul being fundamentally changed. And at least that's how I felt when I first heard this album in my dorm room in Syracuse University in September 1994 during my sophomore year, after purchasing it on cassette at one of the record stores near campus.
And that's a good lead-in, because while VU is on your brain, my assignment is to have the Beatles on my brain. So not to rehash. So I think that everybody, most people out there that are listening to this podcast right now are like me, or maybe like Arturo. I'm about 4.5 hours into the 7.5 hours of Get Back. Absolutely riveted and fascinated by this so far. I think the most jaw-dropping thing about it is that they go into that studio on January 2nd, that television studio, and they've got a few half-baked ideas and no songs. And they're supposed to have everything ready to go by the 18th, 16 or 17 days later. And the fact that, yes, I mean, you can talk, it shows the tension. It shows the bitch fighting between McCartney and Harrison. Coincidentally, Harrison was in the right on that one. You see Lennon kind of in and out of giving a fuck, first out and then back in. But think about the musical output that happened in those 3.5 weeks, that they come in with a few half-baked ideas and nothing, and they come up with the songs and the output they did. And actually, there was so much tape and so much inspiration and so much to dive through that they couldn't get an album out of it. And so what you ended up with was 2 rejected mix and sequencing jobs by Glyn Johns. Coincidentally, Glyn Johns' coat is one of the stars of Get Back. This Big Bird looking feather coat. It's really fabulously mod. So they rejected the 2 mixes that he tried to do of what was originally known as Get Back. And then as they were breaking up, I believe they just sort of gave up and they made Phil Spector. Yes, that Phil Spector, the Arbiter. And of course, he pumped out the album that we all came to know as Let It Be, which took the source material as the music and all of that wonderful music from these sessions. And Spector did this sort of obnoxious hybrid of, I want to make an album that illustrates the fact that it was never actually finished. So I'm going to make it sound unfinished in parts. And in other parts, I'm going to make it sound extremely, incredibly, obnoxiously, over the top, ridiculously, ludicrously finished. And so you got
long and winding road.
Okay, no. Well, it's not. It's okay. That was McCartney's fault. Spector's fault were all the string overdubs and the choruses and all of the sort of classical ridiculousness and sap and lacquer that came on to some of it. Spector did an admirable job because, again, it was stuff, McCartney hated the process. Lennon hated most of Paul's music, and so Spector came in and made something respectable of it.
Right.
But it kind of was purposely done as a way of saying that this is the dangling participle, and that the Beatles leave the story on. Well, Paul McCartney famously, and I'm sure most people who are into rock and roll mythology as much as we are know that McCartney absolutely hated what Spector did, at least to his stuff. Especially, he really didn't like the treatment of The Long and Winding Road or Let It Be or I Me Mine, Harrison's I Me Mine, and also Across the Universe, which got this kind of strange choral string treatment as well.
He fucked up all three of those Beatles songs. I'm not a fan of of the Spector version of Let It Be at all.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that in a minute. So this sets up now McCartney, having the power he did in 2003, decided it was finally time to have his revenge on Phil, and he recruited three young guys that had association with the Abbey Road studios and with either George Harrison or George Martin. These guys being Paul Hicks, Guy Massey, and Alan Rouse, to go in and essentially start over and produce the album anew, produce and mix it anew, and to make their own decisions. And so what results from this is 2003's Let It Be Naked. The reason it is called Naked is because it strips off all the stuff that Spector did, and it strips off all the stuff that everybody else tried to do, and it goes back into the raw tapes.
And digitally remastered it too.
And digitally remastered, yes. Very good point. And so the main exercise is let's take what ostensibly has always been talked about and thought about and curated as an unfinished record and make it sound like a finished record. And in that respect, they do a beautiful job of it.
Yeah.
Different sequencing. All of those Spector overdubs are gone. And you also get some different takes used and a different mix. And so, for instance, Don't Let Me Down, which inexplicably was left off the finished product. That's probably Lennon's best song that he came up with.
Yeah, during this time, yeah.
During this period, is back on the record now. In a way that Billy Preston's electric piano playing is actually more prominent and more lush and more lovely and less buried than it was even on the version that George Martin released, the George Martin produced single. And you get that, and obviously it starts with Get Back, which is supposed to be the original name. And it has everything else. It gets rid of Maggie May and Dig It and, and all of the chatter. So basically all the stuff that Spector put on there to, again, the idea was that these were a bunch of guys fucking around in the studio. And so he wanted to make it sound like it. No, they wanted to make it sound like they made a real record. And so it sounds great. It's digitally remastered. It's sharper. It's stronger. It's more in your face. The vocals are way more up in front, so there's no reverb, there's no sort of subtle placement. It's right up there in your face, which really works on Two of Us with the voices right there. Really works on Dig a Pony. Does not work on The Long and Winding Road. Now we can goof on that song. I know what you're going to say, Arturo.
All I'm going to say is that there is no way to polish or improve on that turgid, maudlin piece of shit ballad, one of the worst songs of McCartney's career. Sorry. There we go.
Which I absolutely agree with. That's the one thing, you can say this is not a total improvement over what Phil did. I mean, Phil did make a couple of good decisions. This version of The Long and Winding Road, McCartney for about 2 years decided he wanted to sing like a Muppet. And so everything is up. Get back.
Yeah.
It has this kind of weird, almost cartoony singing. That's way up in the mix in these songs, which for most of it is great. But for the Long and Winding Road here, it's not the same vocal take that Spector used. From what I've read, Spector used the take before the one that's used on here, where he's actually just kind of like singing, like R&B singing, and he's got the growl, and he's got kind of the soul and scratch in his voice. Whereas here, he's trying to do that perfect Kermit take. And so at least Phil had the good sense to drown out this piece of shit in the strings. And at least he made it lovelier and less annoying and less trite by doing that. And at least he took the honest vocal take as opposed to this one.
Still, you cannot make chicken salad out of chicken shit.
Nope. No matter how you swing it, no, you can't. I also think that in some cases the vocal featuring the vocals so prominently doesn't quite work. Like I've got a feeling, I think it's a little too strong there. I also think For You Blue, you don't need as much Harrison in your face there. So, there's a lot of quibbling, but by far the main reason to check out this record, and what you would say is that if the idea is that they were making an unfinished record, this is finishing it. The cherry on the sundae is the mix of Dig a Pony on this record, which proves if you couldn't really get it in the more staid mix that Spector put out there, this one kind of proves that in terms of musical vocabulary, John Lennon and Duane Allman kind of drew from the same sources. There's a groove on this. And same thing with I've Got a Feeling too. And McCartney's thing. There's almost like a southern, almost like it's more like a basement bar rock type of vibe.
In other words, you're kind of alluding to Creedence Clearwater Revival, who released their classic Bayou Country album in January of '69. Yeah,
pretty much. I mean, you've got some of that going on, and you've got some country feeling, but it's this it's got that southern rock sway that they had going on. So the beat that they're working on is great. And again, I would say that this album, this take on it, proves that they had the stuff there to make a great record. And a great, complete sounding, logical record that wasn't too bloated, that could get that could accomplish a good track mixing, and sounded like it was made on purpose, as opposed to all these filmmakers and all these archivists and all these other assholes manipulating these guys into doing some half-baked shit. That is not what happened. Wonderful music that is wonderfully presented here on Let It Be Naked. Not perfect, but it does show that they had the potential to make a perfect, actually complete record back then.
And now, folks, we have come to the very end. We have finished this long marathon episode where we defended Stone Temple Pilots, hopefully successfully. I think successfully.
Yes.
And we rhapsodized about two amazing documentaries and two amazing albums. And let's talk about our next episode, Chris, and let people know, but not give too much. We're coming to the end of 2021. 30 years ago was 1991. 30 years ago saw the release of what you, Chris, and I, two of us, both believe is the single greatest hip-hop record album ever made. No, folks, we're not going to tell you what it is. You have to listen. You have to tune in for the next episode. But for the next episode, Chris and I will dive deep into the recording, the background, the making, and what eventually happened in the aftermath of the group, the artist that made the greatest hip-hop album ever made.
We're approaching the end of 2021, which means we are in superlative season. Everyone has a #1 record. Arturo's is Crawler, by the band Idols. Mine is Home Video by Lucy Dacus. We're sure you have a #1 album too. What is it? Tell us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. In the meantime, have an excellent holiday season, and we'll see you back here in 2 weeks when, yes, we'll be talking about the greatest hip-hop album ever made.